"Ma'am, you sure that thing's not a super soaker?" he asked, his voice loud enough for his two buddies to hear and snicker. "Didn't know they made them in safety orange." Amber didn't look up. Her focus was on the rifle, its custom-built chassis a vibrant, almost defiant orange against the drab olive-green world of the shooting range. Her long blonde hair was pulled back in a tight, functional ponytail, and the royal blue of her top seemed to make her a beacon of color in a sea of tactical tans and blacks. She continued her setup with a deliberate, unhurried economy of motion that spoke of deep familiarity. She placed the rifle on its bipod, the metal legs clicking into place with a sound as sharp and clean as a breaking icicle. Her movements were a silent rebuke to the chaotic energy of the men next to her. She heard the slide of a bolt carrier group slam home in the lane beside her. The first young Marine's friends were now fully engaged, their attention drawn from their own black, heavily accessorized M4-style carbines to the curiosity at Lane 7. "Seriously, though," another one said, his voice a low drawl, "did your husband buy that for you? It's cute." Amber's hands never paused. She seated a magazine into the rifle's receiver. The click was firm, authoritative. She still hadn't made eye contact, her world contained within the few square feet of her shooting mat. Her silence seemed to bother them more than any angry retort could. It was a language they didn't speak. In their world, challenges were met with louder challenges, bravado with more bravado. Silence was a void, and they felt an urgent need to fill it. The first Marine, the smirking one, took a step closer. He was a corporal, judging by the chevrons inked on his arm, a leader of a very small, very loud fire team. "Hey, I'm just saying, this is a 100-yard range. You need help zeroing that thing. It can be tricky. Lots of math." He winked at his friends, who rewarded him with throaty chuckles. Amber finally looked up. Her eyes were a cool, steady gray, and they met the corporal's for a brief, unblinking moment. She offered no smile, no frown. Her expression was neutral, observant. It was the look of a predator conserving energy, and it was utterly lost on him. "I think I can manage," she said. Her voice was calm, even, devoid of the irritation they were so clearly trying to provoke. She turned her attention back to her equipment, pulling a small, weather-beaten notebook and a Kestrel wind meter from her range bag. She began taking readings, her fingers dancing over the device's buttons. The young Marines exchanged confused glances. This was a level of preparation they didn't understand for a simple 100-yard paper target. They were here to make loud noises and put holes in a silhouette, a ritual of camaraderie and gunpowder. Her meticulous process felt like an accusation against their own casual approach. "Look at that," the third Marine whispered, just loud enough to carry. "She's got a whole science project going on. Sweetheart, you just point and shoot. It's not that complicated." The condescension was a steady drumbeat, a rhythm of disrespect. They talked around her and over her as if she were a piece of furniture, a novelty item brought to the range for their amusement. They dissected her stance as she settled onto the mat, critiqued her grip on the pistol grip, and offered unsolicited advice on her cheek weld. Each piece of help was wrapped in a layer of patronizing language, "ma'am," "sweetheart," "miss," that turned respect into a weapon. Amber lay prone, her body a study in stillness. She was an extension of the rifle, her breathing slow and controlled, her heartbeat a steady, metronomic rhythm in her ears. The world narrowed to the reticle in her scope and the distant paper target fluttering in the afternoon breeze. The noise from the next lane was just another variable like wind or humidity to be noted and compensated for. She adjusted the parallax on her scope, the image of the target snapping into crystalline focus. The corporal, unable to stand being ignored any longer, stepped directly behind her lane, his shadow falling over her. "You know, that's a pretty expensive scope for a toy rifle," he said. He then did something that crossed an unspoken line. He reached down and tapped the rifle's bright orange stock with the toe of his boot. "Custom paint job." The touch was light, almost casual, but it was enough. The tap on the orange stock sent a jolt through her, not of anger but of memory. The range dissolved. The scent of burnt powder and cut grass was replaced by the fine talcum powder dust of Afghanistan, a smell that clung to everything. Your skin, your clothes, the inside of your throat. She was no longer a woman in a blue shirt, but a sergeant in desert camouflage, sweat stinging her eyes under the oppressive weight of her helmet and body armor. She was at a makeshift range on a forward operating base, the sun a merciless hammer in the sky. Beside her was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He was cleaning his rifle, a custom-built M40A5 that had become a legend in their battalion. Its stock was a garish, chipped-up orange. "Why orange, Gunny?" she had asked him then, a young sergeant in awe of the quiet professional. He had squinted at the distant mountains, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Because out here, everything is some shade of brown, Perry. The dirt, the uniforms. When you get to a certain level, you earn the right to not blend in. You become the landmark they all talk about. Color doesn't matter. Only the cold math of the shot. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, a flash echo in the present. But the feeling remained, a cold, hard certainty. The orange wasn't a fashion statement. It was a legacy. At the far end of the firing line, an older man in a red range safety officer vest had been watching the entire exchange. His name was Dave, a retired master sergeant who had seen more than his share of range day peacocks. He'd let it play out, trusting the woman to handle herself. Most civilians either got flustered or complained. This one did neither. She was a block of ice. But the boot tap crossed a line for him too. It was a profound disrespect for another shooter's weapon. He started to walk over, ready to lay down the law, when he paused. He looked at the woman's unyielding posture, the perfect alignment of her spine and the rifle. He saw the way her non-dominant hand was curled into a fist under the stock, a classic precision shooter's technique. He saw the rifle itself, and it wasn't the brand or even the color that caught his eye, but the action, a custom job he recognized from the competition circuits. That was a 1,000-yard gun, a surgeon's scalpel. Then his eyes fell on the name she'd signed onto the range waiver, clipped to the board at the front desk. A. Perry. Perry. The name snagged on something in his memory, a story he'd heard years ago from a buddy who was an instructor at the marksmanship training unit at Quantico, a legendary shooter from Parris Island, a woman who broke every record on the books. They called her the Ghost because the only evidence she was ever there was the single ragged hole in the center of the bullseye. Dave's demeanor shifted from mild annoyance to urgent purpose. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving quickly over the screen. He found the number he was looking for and hit dial, turning his back to the firing line for a semblance of privacy. The phone on the other end was answered on the second ring. Master Guns Schmidt. "Gunny, it's Dave down at the civilian range off the 5, Dave said, his voice low and quick. "You're not gonna believe who's here." "I'm busy, Dave. What is it?" "It's Perry," Dave said. There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Perry? What, like Sergeant Perry from Weapons Company?" "No, Gunny," Dave said, a grim tone entering his voice. "The one from Parris Island. The Ghost. Amber Perry." The silence that followed was heavier, charged with significance. "Are you sure? Long blonde hair, custom stick painted bright orange. She's in lane 7, and a fire team of brand new corporals are making her life hell. They're about 2 seconds away from getting their teeth kicked in, and they don't even know it." Dave could hear a chair scrape back violently on the other end of the line. "Where did you say you were?" Master Gunnery Sergeant Schmidt's voice was now hard as iron. Dave repeated the range's address. "Stay there. Don't let her leave," the Master Guns commanded. "And for God's sake, don't let them touch her rifle again. I'm on my way, and I'm bringing the colonel." Inside a sterile office at the Marksmanship Training Unit headquarters, Master Gunnery Sergeant Schmidt hung up the phone. A storm was gathering on his face. He was a man built of right angles and regulations, and the idea of a Marine, any Marine, disrespecting a legend of their craft filled him with a cold fury. He didn't knock. He strode into the adjoining office of Colonel Evans, a man known for his calm demeanor and his absolute intolerance for incompetence. "Colonel, we have a problem," Schmidt said without preamble. The colonel looked up from a stack of paperwork, his eyebrows raised. "What kind of problem, Master Guns?" "Gunnery Sergeant Amber Perry is at the civilian range just south of the base, and a group of our Marines are, to use the technical term, harassing her." The colonel's pen stopped moving. The name hung in the air between them. He leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "The Gunnery Sergeant Perry?" Schmidt was already typing on the colonel's desktop computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up a file from the archives. A service record appeared on the screen, and with it an official photograph. The audience, looking over their shoulders, saw a woman with the same cool gray eyes, but her hair was pinned tightly under a service cap. Her face was severe, professional. On the collar of her uniform were the chevrons of a gunnery sergeant. Medals cascaded down her chest, but it was the badges that told the real story. The Distinguished Rifleman Badge, the President's 100 tab. The screen scrolled through a list of her accomplishments. Holder of the all-time high score for rifle qualification at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island. 3-time inter-service rifle champion. Former chief instructor for the Scout Sniper Basic Course. "That one, sir," Schmidt confirmed, his voice tight. "They're mocking her rifle, calling it a toy." Colonel Evans stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His calm demeanor had vanished, replaced by a chilling intensity. "She's a civilian now, but she is and always will be one of ours. Get the cars, now." Back at the range, the air was thick with unresolved tension. Amber had completed her preparations and was about to take her first shot. The world had gone silent and narrow, focused through her scope. The corporal, emboldened by his audience and her continued silence, saw this as his last chance to assert his dominance. He stepped forward, planting himself directly in her field of view, breaking the sacred line between shooter and target. "Look, ma'am," he said, his voice laced with false concern. "I'm honestly worried about your safety, and the safety of everyone else here. You clearly don't know what you're doing. I don't think you're qualified to handle a high-caliber rifle like this." He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. It was his final disastrous overreach. "I'm going to have to ask the RSO to have you removed from the line until you can prove you've taken a basic safety course. We can't have people out here being a danger to themselves." He was no longer just mocking her. He was publicly accusing her of incompetence and fraud, attempting to have her shamed and ejected. He was trying to revoke the one thing she had spent her entire life perfecting, her authority behind a rifle. Just as the RSO, Dave, began to stride forward, his face a thundercloud, a new sound cut through the intermittent crack of gunfire. It was the crunch of tires on the gravel parking lot, fast and aggressive. One vehicle, then two, then three, black SUVs with government plates. They parked in a neat, menacing row. The doors opened in unison. Out stepped Colonel Evans, his Desert Marpat uniform immaculate, the eagle on his collar gleaming. Beside him was Master Gunnery Sergeant Schmidt, his jaw set like granite. Following them were two more figures who commanded instant respect, a female captain, sharp and intelligent, and a base sergeant major, a woman whose mere presence seemed to suck the air out of the immediate vicinity. The range fell silent. One by one the shooters stopped what they were doing, their curiosity piqued by the sudden high-level military presence at their quiet civilian club. The three young Marines froze, their bravado evaporating like mist in the sun. They watched as the four figures strode onto the range with a purpose that was both terrifying and absolute. The colonel and his team didn't scan the crowd. They didn't pause. They walked with ramrod-straight posture directly toward Lane 7, their boots crunching on stray shell casings. The loudmouth corporal looked like he had seen a ghost. His jaw was slack, his face pale. He was trapped between the unmoving woman on the mat and the approaching storm of brass. Colonel Evans stopped a few feet from Amber's position. He ignored the dumbfounded corporal completely. His eyes were fixed on the woman in the royal blue shirt. He took a half-step forward, brought his heels together with an audible click, and rendered the sharpest, most impeccable salute the young Marines had ever witnessed. It was a gesture of profound instinctual respect. "Gunnery Sergeant Perry," the colonel's voice boomed clear and powerful, carrying across the now dead silent range. "It's an honor, ma'am." Amber slowly pushed herself up from the mat, her movements still fluid and deliberate. She stood and returned the salute, her own just as crisp. "Colonel," she acknowledged, her voice even. The colonel dropped his salute and turned his gaze upon the three young Marines. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice deceptively calm, "you seem to be under some misapprehension as to who you are speaking with, so allow me to educate you." He took a step toward them, and they seemed to shrink. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Amber Perry. For 6 years she held the all-time rifle qualification record at Paris Island, a score I'm willing to bet the three of you combined could not match on your best day. She was the head coach for the Marine Corps shooting team, leading them to 3 consecutive national championships. The last time she fired for score at the all-Marine rifle match, she didn't just clean the course of fire, she set a new aggregate record that will likely stand until one of you has grandchildren. He let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow to their pride. The other shooters on the line were staring, their mouths agape. A legend was in their midst. The master gunnery sergeant stepped forward, adding his own piece to the litany of their failure. "That orange rifle you've been so clever about," he said, his voice dripping with scorn, "is a custom-built GA Precision Gladius chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. It cost more than your car, and in her hands it can put a round inside a teacup at 1,000 yards. She built half of it herself. You didn't just disrespect a veteran. You disrespected an artist in her own studio." The sergeant major fixed the corporal with a stare that could peel paint. The shame on the young men's faces was a visible physical thing. They stood stiffly, eyes locked forward, their earlier smirks now looking like death masks. The crowd of onlookers was a silent jury, their judgment already passed. The colonel's voice dropped, becoming a cold, precise weapon. He addressed the corporal directly. Your job as a Marine, as a leader, is to identify threats and assets. You looked at a decorated gunnery sergeant, a master of your shared craft, and you identified a target for your own insecurity. You failed. You failed to recognize excellence. You failed to show respect. And you failed to uphold the core values of this institution. He paused, letting the weight of the indictment settle. You and your fire team will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. You will be in your Service A uniform. From there you will be escorted to the Sergeant Major, who has designed a thorough re-education program on the subjects of professional courtesy and the rich history of women in the Marine Corps. Is that understood? Yes, sir, the three of them choked out in unison. With the antagonists thoroughly dismantled, all eyes turned to Amber. She had remained quiet through the entire Vindication, a calm center in the storm of her own defense. She looked at the three young, terrified Marines, not with triumph, but with a kind of weary disappointment. She took a breath and spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't an "I told you so," it was a lesson. The standard is the standard, she said simply. It doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't care what color your rifle is. It only cares about performance. All that other noise, it's a distraction. Focus on the standard. The rest will take care of itself. It was a statement of pure, undiluted professionalism, a master's wisdom offered in the wake of a fool's mistake. As she spoke, her gaze drifted back to her rifle. The vibrant orange of the stock seemed to pulse in the sunlight. A final, brief memory surfaced. She was much younger, standing at the national matches at Camp Perry. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne had just won the Wimbledon Cup, a feat of legendary long-range shooting. He found her later, away from the cheering crowds. He was holding his own famous orange rifle. Without a word, he handed her a small unopened can of Duracoat spray paint. The color on the label was blaze orange. "When you're better than all of them," he had said, a rare, genuine grin cracking his weathered face. "You can paint your rifle any damn color you want. It's not arrogance if you can back it up, Perry. It's a statement. It tells them you're not there to hide." The colonel, the master gunnery sergeant, and their team gave her a final respectful nod. They turned and marched back to their vehicles, their purpose served. The three disgraced Marines, under the watchful eye of the RSO, packed their gear in humiliated silence and scurried away. The range was left in a state of stunned quiet. Amber Perry returned to her mat. She settled back into her prone position, the rifle feeling like a natural extension of her body. The entire world, which had grown loud and complicated, once again narrowed to the simple, perfect circle of her scope. She took a breath, let half of it out, and felt the familiar, comfortable stillness settle over her. Her finger curled around the trigger. There was no anger in the action, no revenge. There was only the process, the cold math. The trigger broke with a clean, crisp snap. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a familiar and welcome push. The crack of the shot was sharp, a definitive full stop to the day's drama. A split second later, the sound of the impact returned from 100 yards away, a satisfying thwack. Through the scope she saw the result. A single perfect hole had appeared in the dead center of the bullseye, a dark punctuation mark on the clean white paper. The entire range, which had slowly started to resume its noisy business, went silent once more. This time the silence wasn't from shock or tension, it was from awe. A few weeks later, Amber was back at the same range. She was in the middle of a firing sequence when a hesitant figure approached her lane. It was one of the three Marines from that day, not the loudmouth corporal, but the one who had been quieter, a follower. He waited respectfully until she had finished her string of fire and cleared her weapon. "Gunnery Sergeant Perry?" he asked, his voice low. He wouldn't meet her eye. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for my behavior a few weeks ago. I was out of line. There's no excuse." Amber looked at him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Apology accepted, Marine." He seemed to gather his courage. "Ma'am, I was watching you shoot. My grouping, it's always a little to the left. I can't figure out why. I was wondering if—" She considered him, then gestured to his rifle case. "Uncase your weapon. Let me see your position." For the next 10 minutes, she didn't speak. She just watched him. She watched his grip, his breathing, his trigger pull. Finally, she offered a single, concise piece of advice about the placement of his thumb, a tiny adjustment that would change the entire dynamic of his hold. He tried it. He fired 5 shots. When he looked through his spotting scope, he saw a tight, clean group right in the center of the target. A look of pure, unadulterated joy spread across his face. "Thank you, Gunny," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you." A seed of mentorship had been planted in the barren ground of his prior ignorance. At the base, the fallout was more formal. The sergeant major who had been part of the cavalry personally developed and implemented a new mandatory training block for all junior NCOs, focused on the history of decorated female service members and the dangers of unconscious bias. The story of the orange rifle became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale told in squad bays and armories. It was a story about how respect is earned not by the volume of your voice but by the precision of your shot. If you were inspired by this story of quiet professionalism and undeniable skill, please like and share this video. Subscribe to She Chose Valor to honor our women veterans and hear more stories of their strength and resilience.